Bueno, pues buenos días a todos. Tenemos el honor de estar en este ágora acompañados de dos absolutos expertos en materia de cambio climático. Les he pedido Álvaro. Les voy a hacer an introduction in Spanish so people get to know you better. Vamos a hacer una introducción de este panel primero en español y a continuación haremos un debate con Lord Stern y con la embajadora Decima Williams en inglés, con lo cual aquellos que no tengan muchas ganas hoy de practicar su inglés, podéis recoger los auriculares para poder seguir el debate y no perderos nada. Thank you.
Continúa.
Es un verdadero placer teneros hoy aquí. Es difícil presentar a las personas que tenemos hoy aquí sentadas, en primer lugar porque sus currículums ocupan más de 3 folios en premios, en reconocimientos, en ambos casos 50 años de carrera profesional dedicados al trabajo en materia de desarrollo, en materia de Agenda 2030. Y quisiera presentar muy brevemente, mientras venía con Lord Stern en el coche, le preguntaba cuál sería la forma más fácil de presentarle. Es un profesor de económicas de la London School of Economics. Ha estado trabajando en materia de cooperación al desarrollo y public policy durante más de 50 años, por lo menos 3/4 partes de su vida como académico, 1/4 parte trabajando como Chief Economist de la European World Bank of Reconstruction Development. Trabajó para el gobierno de Gordon Brown. Ha recibido más de 20 premios en su vida en materia económica. Se le reconoce el trabajo del el Stern Report, un report que publicó en 2006 en materia de cambio climático. Ha vivido en África, en China, en India, ha desarrollado proyectos personalmente en todos los lugares del planeta y en concreto ha tenido, le decía, la paciencia de seguir el desarrollo de una ciudad, específicamente Palampul, en África durante 45 años para ver cómo sus decisiones y sus análisis se veían en la evolución de dicha ciudad. Por otro lado, tenemos a nuestro lado a Decima Williams, probablemente una de las mayores expertas en materia de Agenda 2030, de los SDGs, de los ODS en el mundo. Ha sido embajadora de Naciones Unidas para la Agenda 2030, ha sido presidenta de la Alianza por el Desarrollo de los Estados de las Pequeñas Islas, ha sido coordinadora de Género y Cambio Climático en la UNFCCC, ha participado en materia de todo tipo de debates de clima, experto en México, en Bonn y en otros lugares del mundo. Además es una emprendedora. Tiene y está desarrollando una iniciativa específica en turismo sostenible y es embajadora permanente de Granada, que es de donde es originaria. Es una presentación un tanto informal y, como ya les he adelantado a ambos, muy probablemente este ágora nos invita a hacer un debate relativamente informal. Así que la primera pregunta que veníamos debatiendo en el coche, a lo mejor para Lord Stern, es: muchas de las personas que nos acompañan hoy aquí, many of the people who surround us today here are people who have been listening on the news that climate change is it's a real crisis, it's real and it's happening. But then we hear some governments and some leaders saying that this is not true, that climate change is not happening. So to those who are a little bit confused about what is really happening, is this a crisis, is not a crisis? You've been studying this in numbers forever. What is your opinion? What can we tell these people?
Well, if you are worried about whether you're ill, you go to ask somebody, like a medical doctor, to look at your symptoms and use their professional scientific skills to try to understand what your problem is. If you're trying to learn about nuclear physics, you would go to somebody who knows about nuclear physics. If you're trying to understand climate, then the natural place to go is climate scientists. That climate science is 200 years old. It started with a famous French mathematician and physicist called Fourier. And it's been built up over 200 years. And in the last 40 or 50 years, we've had particularly powerful data which has confirmed what the earlier distinguished scientists discussed and analyzed. And the phenomenon is really very simple, is that greenhouse gases oscillate at a frequency which interferes with the infrared, which is bouncing back off the Earth's surface. So that interference is like a greenhouse. It keeps the energy there. So basically, if you want to understand a phenomenon, go to the scientists who've understood the phenomenon. Now, I hope you wouldn't go to somebody who was selling snake oil if you were seriously ill. And if you're trying to understand this, go to the people who've studied it. You know, in the UK, we have plenty of pubs. And I can go into any pub and I can find all sorts of opinions. Would I run my life on the opinions of the people I meet in the pub? I don't think so.
Exactly. So going maybe around the pubs, I have a friend here who came out the other day by bike to the COP. And we were saying, you know, we have to ride by bike and come here and stop using cars because we have to send a message to society that we need to make a change. But if you go back in history, in 1972, to the first UN Convention on Environment, one of the images that you can get from, if you go to Google and you Google it, is people riding their bikes trying to send a message that we needed to ride bikes and stop driving cars. So it's been almost 50 years, people trying to ride the bikes and trying to send a message. Why is the message, you think, not getting through?
Well, let me begin by saying what a great pleasure it is to be here in Madrid. Un gran placer, muchas gracias. Y todo, este es todo de mi español. Bueno, the problem of understanding climate change has to be understood from the scientific experience and knowledge, but experientially, something has changed in the last 40 to 50 years. And coming from a small island and representing small islands and low-lying states, our experience is that something radical has changed in our weather, in our climate, and it is forcing a way of life that is very different. So we know experientially, empirically, that there is a climate crisis or a climate emergency out there. And when Donnelly Meadows started the Club of Rome so long ago and rode her bike around, that has picked up. Notice it was a woman taking the academic high road, taking the biking high road. There's a woman in Ghana making bamboo bikes today as a response. So the women's tradition continue. And I want to say that it has scaled up since 1972, our knowledge and our response, but it is woefully inadequate. And the crisis is moving faster than our response.
And that is something that it's worrying us. I mean, I was born around the late 70s, and as I have some kids, 3 kids, and they came here, and one of my friends, also his son, was like, so if this is so serious and so urgent, for example, regarding the SDGs, why do we have to wait till 2030? Why do we have a plan for the 2030 if we really need a solution now? What will you tell those kids?
There's lots that they can do right away. They can do exactly what they're doing, which is putting pressure on their parents and the older generations to act. And you can change your diet right away. You can take more public transport or ride a bike. You can do that right away. But there's some things that take longer. If you tell people take more public transport, you have to invest to make the public transport better. If you want to go for 50 or 100 miles, you may need to drive. We can make cars now which run on electricity, you all know that, and we can make the electricity carbon zero. But it takes time to make those investments. So the answer to the question is, please keep putting the pressure on us. These are the things you can do now. These are the things we have to invest in and change and participate in that change through the pressing for policy. You can, if you're old enough, if you're 20 or 21 and you're starting to save through your pension, make sure your pension money goes into the technologies and investments of the 21st century, not the technologies and investments of the last century. That way you will help push the investments which we need, which do take time, in a good direction. So things you can do now and things you have to invest in, both.
Yeah. But for example, in Spain, I don't know if you're aware of this, but a few years ago with a different government, many people like normal people, colleagues, friends, invested in solar panels and in solar energy, thinking that that was the transformation that needed to be done. But at some point, the government changed the regulation, and many people actually lost their money in these processes. And so right now, not everyone, but some people are thinking, well, you know, sure, we have to invest in this, we have to transform our lives, we have to believe that this can happen. But they lost their money. So what is different? What do you think is different now?
I want to go back first to the question you asked, Nick. I won't be long. I have 5 acciones para la juventud. First of all, they must do what Professor Stern proposed. Take every initiative that you can. Reduce your use of plastics, reduce your use of energy, really ramp up the green lifestyle. Secondly, you must tell the stories of those who are victims of the climate drama. Visit the developing countries where the crisis is playing out. Tell our stories. Bring it to the north so that you can get a greater incentive to do the third thing, which is to drive for the policies that would bring down emissions, that would scale up ambition. Fourthly, you must support your government initiatives and continue to push them to take ambition in finance, move towards a 1.5 lifestyle and a 1.5 degree planet. And fifthly, you yourself must be the conveyors of the kinds of behavior, whether it's investment or otherwise, to the next generation, so that young people become agents of change in a proactive way. Regarding investments, look, I live by the saying that, you know, once bitten, twice emboldened for something that is worth it. If you really want to change the economy from predicated on fossil fuel to green, it's going to take a lot of risk. They're going to win some and you're going to lose some. So I think you should be enabled by the experience of loss to figure out what is a winning strategy. And instead of giving up, perhaps look for partners who have had a different experience so that we could get to a win-win solution. We cannot stay invested in fossil fuel. We must move from that. And I think that, you know, one bad experience in Spain is not a reason to cancel it out. Imagine us in the islands. In 2004, we lost 200% of our GDP from one climatic event. And here we are 15 years later, rebuilding the economy. So be bold, be stronger than the climate events.
Yeah.
And if I could, I firmly agree with what Decima just said, but your example, Spain's example, it happened in the UK too, is bad public policy. You have to give strong signals, so subsidizing solar would be one. Even better is to stop subsidizing fossil fuels. You need to do both. But what we're trying to do when we make policy is encourage change, to foster change. And people have to invest, to put money up front to invest in that change. And you have to give them the confidence that policies are going to stay in place for some time. Not forever, because as we've seen, solar becomes so much more competitive, it doesn't need the subsidy anymore. But you have to say in advance, we're going to begin the subsidy, it'll be strong, it will last. As the costs come down, we're going to reduce the subsidy. Then everybody knows where they stand. But to say we have the subsidy, suddenly find it's been successful, the costs have come down, and then you crash it down to nothing without any notice, that's bad policy. Why would people believe you the next time if that's what you want to do? So I'm not advocating rigidity, I'm advocating predictability. And that's a fundamental part of public policy. And what you described is bad public policy, bad governance.
Yeah, so the good news is that our government right now, which it's forming, and we're hoping that we're getting those good signals and positive signals, both from the European Union, our governments, European governments, and hopefully very soon we'll have positive messages coming from the Blue Zone. And we just heard these kids screaming in the back. We have a lot of youth and a lot of energy, as you can see in this arena. And I was thinking both of you have a very vast trajectory and experience in teaching, academy. What is, in your view, and I know you've been teaching secondary school, climate change, gender, many issues, and university yourself, what is, in your view, the click, the thing that we need to really teach those students? How can we make them engage in this process? Because they will be the future CEOs of companies, they will be the future public servants, they will be the future NGOs. How do you think we can get them on board and make this process accelerate?
Yeah. I think actually it's a matter not of getting them on board, but of our generation getting on their board. Because we asked our students coming into economics at the London School of Economics, where I teach, we asked them, what do you want to learn about? Why have you come here to study economics? They tell us two things, top of the list. Number one, environment and climate. Number two, inequality. That's what they want to learn about. And I'm very pleased. I would be disappointed if an 18-year-old came to me and said, I'm passionate about inflation. They should be passionate about tackling the problems of the world, and they are. So it's not somehow the teachers getting the students on board. It's the teachers taking on the problems which are very clear and which the students identify already. So we are starting to change our courses to focus much more. But we've been too slow, and that pressure from the students is one of the most important things that we've had in the last 3 or 4 years. It's really changed, and it's changing the world, and they will keep the pressure up, they should keep the pressure up, so it's our generation that has to respond in terms of the curriculum and the teaching and the research that we bring in universities.
Can't argue with that. Let me take it from the perspective of youth activism. And there is an explosion of interests in the climate arena now as a result of Greta from Sweden. I think that in general, she brings to the table an empathy and a compassion and a solidarity that perhaps was latent. She has brought it to the fore. And you see it among the young people. They're engaged. And they're engaged because they want equality, they want greater justice, they want greater equity. I want to applaud the European young people for that and ask them to scale it up. Keep that pressure up on the elders, like people like our age. But beyond that, in a very material sense, I think we have to get resources into the hands of the young people who are active in the Southern Hemisphere. I know of a young woman in Guinea who puts all her effort into spreading the SDGs and has no way of getting around her country. I know of a young man I just met outside who came from Namibia and is unable to pay his way back to go home. I know of a young man in my program in Grenada who is a valedictorian. He's trying to study building engineering. He wants to create buildings that will save lives in storms and hurricanes. Can't get the funding to go to college. So there needs to be a big infusion of support and capacity development in the Southern Hemisphere so young people could actually play the roles that Greta is playing here and so many others. So that linkage south-north has to be increased, maybe by young people in particular and young women. And they're leading in many ways and they should be supported in that.
I agree. So we're going to get a little bit more technical, not a lot, but a little bit more technical with a couple questions. And because in this Agora, we try to learn at least one thing per day. And one of the things I learned yesterday by reading some of your backgrounds, history, etc., was this concept of stationary is dead. I can't even pronounce the word. Stationary is dead. And I would try to look in the dictionary what that meant, and I was not very sure about it. It was in your recent article published by the New York Times, if I'm correct. Can you explain our colleagues what does that mean?
Stationarity is an idea from statistics, and it's saying that the process that is producing the numbers that you're looking at is a process that's not changing. So if you're an insurance company and you're insuring against flood and you try to calculate what the probability of a flood of this severity would be, what insurance companies have done in the past is to look back over the last 100 years or more and say how often have floods like this occurred. So if it's a once in 30-year flood, then you think that that's your probability of 30 over if it's once in 30 years, then it's something like a 3 or 3.5% probability. So if you charge the person for the insurance, how much you charge is based on paying it out 3% or 3.5% of the time. But you're assuming then that those data about the probability of floods, which come from the last 100 years, are telling you about what's going to come in the next 10 or 20 years. And we know that's not true anymore. That the weather climate that we're facing as we look ahead is going to be much more difficult than that which we faced looking backwards. So it's reminding us stationarity is dead. Don't simply try to predict the future from what you've seen in the past. We've got to use better science than that. We've got to understand how things are changing. And if we look at it that way, we recognize that the severity of hurricanes is going up. The severity of storm surges is going up. Drought-prone areas are going to be hit by drought more often. And we have to try to understand those risks because A, we want to bring them down by living a different way and emitting much less greenhouse gases. But B, we've got to plan to tackle the unavoidable. We've done so much damage in the past that this stuff is coming to us. So we've got to build in a more resilient way. We've got to make sure that when a hurricane strikes the Caribbean, that resources can get in very quickly. And they don't get in very quickly. So as well as understanding how important it is to act in a way that makes those things less likely, that's fundamental. That's what we're talking about and living the different lifestyle. But we've got to recognize this stuff is happening. It's coming, and more serious stuff is coming because of what we have already done. And we have to plan for that too.
Yeah. I read one of the good examples I read, and for me was a very clear vision, was like, we already know the price of a pair of shoes right now, but we don't, and we expect to go to the stores and find pairs of shoes at the same price. But this concept that you were introducing to me actually gave me the idea that I might not know the price of a pair of shoes in the coming years. And I'm wondering, given your experience in Grenada, how does that feel in a personal situation?
Well, I'm telling you, it is quite quite a difficult scenario to adjust to, because we have been saying, at least for the last 15 years, the world cannot get up to a 2-degree world. That is intolerable, that is catastrophic. And so the movement to get a global commitment around 1.5 as a maximum, as an average, because it's going to fluctuate in various parts of the world. But an average, if we commit to 1.5, that is moving forward. That is delinking from the past. And so the 1.5 scenario is here finally, thanks to the scientists in the IPCC. But now it is up to the global population to mainstream that. So we should move from the science and away from silence, because there are too many silent voices around what Professor Stern has said, that in fact we are in a scenario that is more and more dangerous. And in the islands, in Grenada, in the Caribbean, you've seen what has happened in the Bahamas. So let us not be silent, and let us try to take action, for example, in the economy or in financing, to make sure that we raise the level of financing ambition that is commensurate with achieving 1.5.
Yeah.
Whether it is in energy or in education or in food security systems or generally building resilience. I think that we are doing it on our own. We are transforming our economy. Adaptation is real. We are coping with the sea level rise and the loss in agriculture and the biodiversity loss and so on that come with it. But it requires an adamant shift on the part of the industrial countries to maintain their industries, your lifestyles, and more at a level of 1.5. You must internalize that. That's your message for today. That's your learning today. 1.5 for all to stay alive.
And the positive side of the story, because it's in many ways such a worrying story, but the positive side of the story is as we drive towards 1.5, make the lifestyle changes, make the kinds of investments that we need in transport and energy and buildings and so on to do things differently, we'll discover that this new model of development is actually much more attractive. It's cities where you can move and breathe. That sounds like a good idea, even if you've never heard of climate change. It's a cleaner, healthier way of living, and a much more efficient way of living. It uses energy more efficiently, it uses resources more efficiently. We'll cycle and walk more. You know, this is an increase in our standard of living. So we shouldn't say that this has to be giving up so many things. Yes, some parts of the lifestyle will be giving up. We will have to eat less meat. But on the other hand, you know, building and running cities where you can move around much more easily, that's a big plus in our standard of living. Stronger public transport is a big part of the story, and that helps particularly poor people. We should be restoring degraded land. You know, I've lived and worked for long periods in India and Africa. Restoring degraded land is a fundamental part of increasing living standards and making us more resilient and storing carbon in the soil. So there's so much of what we do that actually makes us better off if we do it wisely. Yeah?
And that is the vision of the Sustainable Development Goals. I mean, that
Exactly.
is the vision of Agenda 2030. It's not to punish the North, it's not to abandon the South, but it's together we can have a common set of principles that improve the lifestyles for both. In the North, you have to make a lot of downward adjustment, but adjustments that will improve your quality of air and your food supply and so on. And for us in the South, it would also spark development, increasing the journey out of poverty and degradation. So I think I want to be a champion today for the SDGs, and I see you wearing a button, so we're all on the same page.
Yeah.
And I want to be a champion for 1.5, and I think that we have people here who are already carrying that message and experiencing the benefits from that.
Yes, I actually wanted to make a stop on the SDGs. Many, well, not many, but some people say that the Sustainable Development Goals and the Agenda 2030 will probably end up being like similar to what the Human Rights Declaration was in 1948, something that changed completely the course of history. I would like to, for those of our colleagues who are not very familiar to it, do you share this view? Do you think it's really going to be like a milestone, something that is going to change the course of life?
I think it has the potential for being a watershed at the global level. It really does, and it's only just beginning. First 5 years, young people are latching on to it. The business community realizes that there is a lot more money to be made in the green economy than in the brown economy. So that's taking off. But maybe in lifestyle, there's a little bit of a reluctance to it. Let me say that for the planet and for humanity, right now, that is the script, that is the program. And it is within that the climate change is anchored. Climate action, which is SDG number 13, effectively, if we practice good climate policy, we are advocating the SDGs. Mm-hmm. And if we don't have a good climate response, we cannot have a good food security and the 16 other goals of the Sustainable Development Agenda. So I want to again make a claim and a plea that strong climate action is equivalent to transforming the entire template of human behavior in the economy, in society, around peace, around oceans in particular is a very big issue. So that I would make this assertion that if you are not knowledgeable about the SDGs, even if you're not persuaded by them, and you're persuaded to save your own planet, save the melting of the glaciers and so on, do that. Because if you do that, you are indirectly contributing to reducing the trauma that is coming from climate onto the rest of the world. And that's important for us in the South.
Yeah, I think the Sustainable Development Goals are a real landmark. The world got together and said, what do we mean by development? And we know that it's not just about output or GDP. We've understood that for a long time. This was a more constructive discussion. Well, what do we mean by sustainable development? And the first 10 of the goals are about income, hunger, education, health, gender, inequality. And the next 5 are about climate and oceans and forests and sustainable cities and so on. And the last 2 are about how we behave, peace and justice, and the last one is cooperation. And it's very important how they differ from the Millennium Development Goals, which were created at the Millennium for 2015. And there, sustainability was not strong. Environment was not strong. And it shows what we've learned in the 15 or years or so between the Millennium Development Goals and the Sustainable Development Goals. We've learnt about sustainability. We've learnt how important it is to our well-being. We've learned that we destroy the planet at our peril. And that is something which is a very big difference. It's a big advance. And finally, the Sustainable Development Goals apply to everybody. The Millennium Development Goals apply to the developing countries. So how were the developing countries going? How would they be helped? There's a small element, or perhaps not so small element, of patronizing behavior in there. But the SDGs apply to everybody, and it's right that they do. And if you're talking about the environment, who has the biggest effect on the environment? The people who consume more. And they have the bigger responsibility to do things differently.
And we have just a couple of minutes to finish. So I'm not sure if you're aware, but this whole thing and the blue zone and green zone was, we were able to put it together in 3 weeks. We're first pretty proud of, as a country, to have proven that Spain can do many things by just being as crazy as we are. But also we're proud to show a message that, you know, once you really want to have something happen, if you try to go for it, you make it happen. So I kind of want to find in your words, in your experiences, something that you can share with our public today. What would you share with all of us, all the Spaniards that are watching you today? How do you think we can continue this energy? Because we're, you know, I have to say in Spain, we have a lot of energy, but, you know, after those 3 weeks, we get a little bit bored about things and we don't go forward. So what would be the next message for the coming years to keep this energy up and keep going?
Well, the first thing is to, as you rightly said, to celebrate what Spain has done in putting this together in such a short space of time. You know, I think of my own country in the 2012 Olympics. They were planning for that for, I don't know, a decade, not quite a decade, 7 or 8 years. And still, at the last minute, it wasn't so easy. But it happened. But what you've put together, you've done in just a few weeks, and it has been quite remarkable. So we salute and we celebrate. So what happens next? Well, Spain has been a leader on these issues. We discussed solar energy a little earlier, and Spain has been a leader, and Spain could and should continue to be a leader. Spain's a very big country with lots of sunshine, and Spain should be exporting energy to the rest of Europe and perhaps involved, and Europe's got to behave in a way that makes that easier than it does at the minute. So first part of the answer is use those wonderful Spanish assets that you have, and they can benefit you and benefit the world. The second is Spain really knows how to eat. Yeah? And you know, it's a country where the vegetables are absolutely wonderful, right? And you know what to do with them. So that diet, you know, maybe a bit less meat, but the diet is something that Spain can share with the world. And finally, as we began, you know, the young people in Spain are standing up, as the young people around the world are standing up. And that is what, it's not always easy to be optimistic, but it's the contribution, the energy, the demands, the anger, the analysis, the realism of the young people that's so important. So that's, they'll keep you going.
I'm going to build on that. First of all, let me say felicidades. Felicidades a España, porque en 3 weeks, en 3 semanas o menos, ¿no? Ustedes have created something really remarkable. And I think that it shows that where there is a will, there is a way. And the dynamic energy that you brought to creating the COP, I think I agree with my colleague Stern here, that you should maintain that. And take that today, tomorrow, and Friday for a good outcome into the COP25. The blue COP. Make sure that we have good outcomes overall, and certainly for the Ocean Summit next year. One. Secondly, I think that you have a spirit of generosity, you have a spirit of partnership, and I think you need to, all the institutions, all the young people, and so need to be champions for good climate action and for the SDGs. I am active in the Caribbean as an SDG champion. I want to invite you and everybody here to be a champion. Pick your favorite item. You know, if it's clean cities, number 11, you know, if it is equality, number 8, if it's gender, number 5, and try to be a champion for something that will shift your life, shift your family, and shift your community in something higher and better than yourself. That's my challenge to you. And I think you have to also fight for making sure the agreements that we have are not reversed. We don't want to go back, we want to go forward. So whether it is a Paris Agreement, whether it's the Agenda 2030, whether it's a 1.5, find your niche that gives more and more meaning to your life, because you're a global citizen in a world that is facing multiple strands of an emergency, and you could begin to put it back together. So again, muchas gracias and felicidades.
So thank you very much. And just to finish, by the way, she's not going to say it, but I'll say it for her. She has a specific project in tourism, and she's looking for a philanthropist to invest in the project.
Yes.
So if anyone knows any philanthropist, there is a specific project that she is leading that it's fantastic.
Ecotourism.
Exactly, ecotourism. So if anyone knows anyone ready to invest, we already have a concrete example where we can make a difference. Thank you both for being here, and it's been a pleasure, and we look forward to see you very soon.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Well,
Lovely to see you. Thank you, Isabel.
I'm really excited.
Thank you.
to
Thanks
hear
a
your
lot.
students at Keene